Well, we have a special treat. I've been looking forward to this for a long, long time. My friend Derek Wallis, who is the CEO of 33 Capital Management, has agreed to join us. Derek has had an illustrious career as a trader at Soros. Then in 2013, with another firm from Appaloosa, they started Marlowe Partners, and then recently started with 33 Capital Management as a CEO. Derek, thanks for coming on.
Thanks very much for having me. It's good to speak with you.
Yeah, so I'd like to start by thanking you because you were one of my earliest supporters for my Macro Tourist letter, and your encouragement has meant a lot over the years. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you.
Thank you. And, let's just check that I'm still a subscriber because I clicked, I used to have it on my consulting company, and then I closed down my consulting company. It could still be on that credit card. So if not, I will resubscribe. But you either way, you've been kind enough to keep me on your list.
So the real purpose of this is we're going to talk about your career, and we're going to learn lots of fun stories and stuff like that. But I just want to put a little teaser at the beginning here. We're going to talk about what's actually a serious side to this podcast. And Derek is the organizer of a wonderful event on September 13th at the USS Intrepid. It's an evening to honor active military and veterans. This year, they will be supporting the Navy SEAL One More Wave charity. And I just loved your the way you described it. You said the evening will have no speeches, no auction, no pitch for donations, just an open bar at one of the most iconic venues on the planet. So we will talk about more of that at the end. But first, let's jump into it. How obviously you have an accent. For those who don't know, you're New Zealand, if I've got it right. And
yeah, I often say Australia's Canada, so kind of the useless country next to Australia. No offense.
No offense taken. How did you end up as a Kiwi in New York City working for one of the greatest hedge funds in the world?
It's a bizarre story. I was in Europe traveling through as a backpacker, and I was traveling through New York City with a view to going to California. And my brother and I have probably had two arguments in our whole lives, and we were in the middle of one of them, and both of us were too stubborn to make up. And I got kind of stuck in New York, and I lived on a couch in Crown Heights. I lived in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, when quote unquote when it was cool. I think I paid $150 a month rent there, and I went to every recruiter and in the city, and one of them said there's a 3-month job opening up as an assistant on a trading desk, and I said, "What's a trading desk?"
And not only that, that was Soros's.
That was the Soros trading desk. So the trading desk back then we affectionately referred to as the Star Wars bar, and because it was just full of odd characters, mostly blue collar characters. And I arrived in February of 2000, and the firm blew up with the NASDAQ in March 2000. And one of my jobs was to pick up, remember those pink and white paper tickets?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
If you're smart, you still have those on your trading desk, right? Because the technology goes wrong. And so my job was to pick up the carbon copies, and I had a side job of reading out the P&L. And within about 3 weeks of arriving, the NASDAQ crashed and took down the Druckenmiller's portfolio at the same time, and so my instant nickname was the Kiwi Neutron Bomb because obviously I was integral to the blow up. But then
it was
George
your fault, Derek. It was your
fault. That's right.
Buddy.
Yeah, George came down and fired everybody, and nobody knew I was working there, and I stayed there for the next 13 years.
Oh, that's awesome. So were you trading everything? Like, was it equities, futures, bonds, the whole 9 yards?
No, it was pretty solid back then. I mean, there was when I arrived, there were 20 people on the trading desk, and there was a macro team, an international team, a US equity team. There were 4 people on the US equity team, great guys. And so there were 3 of us left when the head stopped rolling.
Right.
A European trader, guy named Eric Marks, who we immediately christened Skid Marks. A Steve Guyhan, who was the macro trader and the default head trader, and Guyhan's name was Knuckles because he was a very blue collar character when he got his own job at Soros, and he used to come to work on Mondays with black eyes and bruised knuckles.
Wow.
and myself, Kiwi. So I just traded US equities. The and everybody thought Soros was finished, but he within 6 months he couldn't help himself, and he started coming back, and we built out the trading desk again.
That's fascinating. Now, so you also worked with Stan, is that correct?
I was there when he was there, but I was 25 years old, and I'd arrived at the trading desk with not one clue of what was going on. Even when the Nasdaq was crashing, I was kind of wondering what the red was doing and why the charts were going, down and to the right instead of down to the up, down to the top. So I overlap with him, but I don't know Stan, and Stan doesn't know me.
So when you're there with not knowing anything about the markets, which is very unusual, usually people are, they'll tell stories about reading Market Wizards, and they always wanted to do this, and you were just kind of thrust into this. Do you think that was almost an advantage in that you didn't have preconceived notions?
Possibly. The job of a trader's changed so much. When I started, it was paper tickets, and maybe there's an internet there, and the guys used to get their PAs on the fax machine, and their PAs were pretty large. They would come down it was up on a table, and the PAs would roll all the way down to the floor. And
1 second, I'm just going to interrupt for people who don't know.
Sure.
PA is personal account.
So that's right.
Yeah,
and there was it was a different way of doing business as well. There was, it wasn't frowned upon to go trade in your own PA before pitching the idea to portfolio manager. And then I would say my development, not knowing anything. One of the rules on the trading desk was no external calls. Don't call a portfolio manager. Don't call PM. They'll call you if they wanted to do something.
Okay.
And I definitely decided to kind of flip that over and started pushing information out to people. So to this day, I have a morning email that goes out at 5:30, 6 in the morning, and then more of an editorial email that goes out at 6:30. But I started sending that out, so new portfolio managers come in. I'd say, look, why don't you get on our email list? We'll tell you what's going on, and then we'll monitor your portfolio. And then the flip side of that is 13 years later. That they say an expert is somebody who knows more and more about less and less until they know everything about nothing, right? I thought I knew it all, and there was a change of guard, and I didn't know it all. I was very siloed and very involved in just my US equity, and the role of the job trader changed without me knowing, which is to be absolutely intimately involved in every investment decision right leading up to the trade, and then afterwards as well. And I became a bit of a dinosaur and had to reinvent myself after that.
Well, let's talk about that, because in 2000, I guess the PMs coming and telling you buy, X 1 million X, Microsoft, and you're going and executing as best you can with your relationships with the sell side.
Yeah, you probably wondered, who took me out for dinner last night?
Right.
You'd call up and say, where can I buy 1 million Microsoft? And upper half, boom, you're done.
But kind of, I guess, did it really change in 2008? Would that probably be right?
The trades were different. In 2008, I would say well over half of our orders were being executed electronically.
Okay, so somewhere between 2000 and 2008, you were already half electronic.
Yeah, I would say by 2006, 2007, we were probably on the forefront of trading electronically outside of the quant community.
Oh, really? Okay. And was that just was that a function of George, or was that a function of someone that, below him that had that, or was it even you that said, this is the way it's going?
It was probably some version of me and seeing, talking to other traders and see how things were done. I was probably one of the first ReadyBook users, which was Goldman's electronic platform. I probably loaded that up 2003. It actually makes me chuckle because our salesperson, a guy named Mike Ferrara, told me that on average I would change an order 26 times, and the average trader would change it 3 times. So, you know,
you're still old school. You were still changing
just
it.
constantly moving it back and forth. And whether that's just restless leg syndrome or I was actually reacting to markets, I couldn't tell you. So,
And why don't you tell me, like, nowadays, like, I've heard the stat, and I don't know if this is true, but like at one point Goldman had like 100 people trading, like salespeople that were trading throughout the world, and it's down to 2, and it's all done electronically. Why don't you kind of explain to people what that job has become and how someone executes nowadays, and whether there is even a trader at there are certain places?
Well, a lot of the time there wouldn't be. I mean, the advent of this probably, I forget the guy's name now. It's probably head trader at J.P. Morgan. And he sort of came up with a sort of wheel concept and transaction cost analysis. But if there was an order came from a portfolio manager and it was a biotech stock below 1% of average daily volume and it was 10 o'clock in the morning, the wheel would just spit it out into like Merrill Lynch's algorithm because that's what executed best at that time, right? And whatever the buy side was doing, the Goldman was probably doing it, in their prop book a year and a half before that, right? But I look at this as sort of unalloyed good because it's the invisible things in Wall Street that cost you the most, and the things that cost you the most, which is impossible to explain to a portfolio manager, is spreads and tighter spreads just save everybody money.
Now, do you think, because one of my pet peeves is that I think that there's been an over-reliance on VWAP or TWAP or whatever algo you want to use, and it looks like it's costless. And someone will say, well, I'll buy this stock, and they go, well, I achieved VWAP, or I was close to VWAP, so I didn't really move the market. Whereas the reality is that they've probably spent all day moving it up, and there's kind of a question at times that I think people might be better off just doing it old school and going, where do you offer $1 million of this and paying up, through the offer $1 instead of VWAPing it, and it's less risk to your career. It doesn't look as bad. You're not going to be dramatically wrong. But having said that, it could still be up $1.50 instead of just up $0.50. Do you have any comments?
Yeah, and the problem is to what extent it's a self-fulfilling prophecy as well, right? I mean, if you watch these intradays, which you probably shouldn't do, but if you watch an intraday and you have an order in VWAP, and let's say it's skewed, it trades 1 million shares a day, and it's skewed, let's say 100,000 to buy on the VWAP, and someone prints a block of 200,000 shares, then the VWAP has to go and catch up with volume, and every share that it buys is a share they're paying through the offer to get those shares. And so you end up with a worse execution price on the back of all sorts of anomalies, right? But it's hard to say. It depends what percentage of volume you are. I mean, for the vast majority of orders, you're just not how many, what's the notional value of Microsoft traded every day?
Oh, it's huge. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So your order doesn't matter, and neither do most institutions for that matter either way. I mean, most of the stuff I think is a random walk intraday, and that you're better off not thinking about it too much.
Can I tell you quickly one of my favorite Soros stories from when I was on the desk? This is in the 90s. And I was just a new kind of tyke, and I was sitting there, and all of a sudden my boss gets this phone call overhead, and he goes back and forth, and then he whispers to the guy that I'm sitting beside that I'm kind of learning from. He says, start buying Methanex, and the trader says, how much? And he goes, it's one of those, I'll tell you when you get close. Yeah, exactly. So we bought this thing for, I don't know, a month. Like, it was every single day. We took Methanex from $12 to $22 or something like that. And along the way, I say to the trader, I say, who is it? And he says, it's Tiger. And I go, like, what the hell? I don't know what a Tiger is. And so I go home and I dial, go into AOL and, the equivalent of Google back then, and figure out who Tiger is. So then all of a sudden, while we're buying this, there's another call, and and I'm thinking, okay, this is it. The order's done. And it goes back and forth, and there's all these calls and stuff like that. And let's say the stock was $22. All of a sudden, my boss, says, listen up, everyone. We're going up on 4 million Methanex, and it's going to print down $1.50, meaning like it's going to, he's going to sell it lower. and we come out a better seller. And I say to and I say to the boss, I go, who's sold it? And it was Soros. And he was smart enough to know that he had to sell it down to get the real print. And from then I watched the stock, and the stock was $12, 6 months later. And that was always kind of my introduction to the hedge fund world. And I always kind of, from then on, thought that guy was the smartest guy on the planet.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the, and the 90s, you may have well been right, that may have been George. One of the things I think a lot of people don't get, particularly, a certain fringe movement within, let's call it the conspiratorial right. And of course, the left wing has conspiratorial aspects to it as well, probably more conspiratorial lately. Is that, George has this intimate touch with things that are going on. But in actual fact, George probably would have said, go buy $100 million worth of that sector, and then the decision was made just elsewhere, right?
Oh, okay.
And so George couldn't give two shits whether the San Francisco Attorney General is left wing, right wing, or anything else. It's the decisions just moved further and further down the open society tree to it's a point where someone's decided to support this attorney general or whatever it may be, and the same is true of trading. I mean, sometimes George would call up the desk 3 or 4 times a day and speak to us, and then sometimes he wouldn't call for 6 months. Right.
So now you got taken out a lot, which has got to have been fun. Like the 2000s, you're a young guy. You got a couple of stories for us?
I mean, I've got many stories for you, but I'm married with 2 kids and a golden retriever at home, so you're not going to get any good ones. But I would say that I was inadvertently clever about it. So when I first arrived in the city, my assumption was I would still move on to California, no matter who I worked for, and then New Zealand. And when I found out that brokers would take me out and also, oh my God, pay for things, I decided to go out every night. So, remember, I lived on a couch in Crown Heights, right? And so I would go out and drink, 8 or 9 beers and eat enormous amounts of food, knowing that I probably wouldn't eat again until lunchtime at Soros, right? But it ended up being a blessing to me, because although I didn't know it, personal relationships are key and important. So I was going out and for the free beer, but I ended up with a really strong network on the back of that, which eventually allowed me to find my next job, and also allowed me to do a lot with the veteran community, which is something we'll talk about later.
What was your favorite haunt?
I mean, I think I gotta say, I'd like to say Whiskey Blue, but it wasn't really. It was Snafu, and Snafu is a dive bar in Midtown, and a guy named John Novak used to bartend there and live there. He was a big guy at JP Morgan. He's still in the business. Shout out to John, and that place was a shithole, and the owner, he had 3 or 4 shops in the city, and I've actually been a bar owner, still am a bar owner. I own a part of Pennsylvania 6 on 31st Street, and I was part of the Tammany Hall crowd as well. But the owner would just he would just advertise for Eastern European bartenders every 2 months on Craigslist. And, then he would just fire them every 2 months, and he had this constant turnover of Eastern European immigrants. You can imagine what they look like. And so, I'll vote for Snafu.
You vote for Snafu. And what was the wild,
you know what Snafu stands for, right?
Remind us all. Situation
normal, all fucked up.
Yeah, that's right. Which was fitting for your evenings out.
It was, I won't say too much, but John, I've been a bartender since I was, in New Zealand, you can drink starting at about age 15, and you can bartend at that age as well. So I've been involved in the bar and the restaurant industry my whole life through college and everything else, and that's eventually how we started trying to help out our military families is we would bartend, and we would give, we didn't need the money. We were working on Wall Street. These people needed the money. They had, they were in wheelchairs and needed to pave their stairs to get a ramp for their wheelchair, and a small town, middle America, and we would just give our tips. And of course, you tipped if you knew what was good for you, and there was a Soros trader bartending, you tipped him well, right? and we would collect our tips and write our check out to charities and send them. So that's where we started. I know you're trying to tease out a story of debauchery, but you're not going to get one, Kevin.
Oh. Maybe another time. Okay, you once said that jiu-jitsu is everywhere once you start looking in trading. Could you explain that comment?
Sure, I'll try to explain it. So I'm relatively new to jiu-jitsu. I've been training about 2.5 years. I've always been interested in martial arts. Both my kids train jiu-jitsu. It's been transformative for them. And explaining jiu-jitsu to the layman can actually be done quite easily. We could, for theoretical situation, let's say that you're 200 strength, Kevin, and I'm 100 strength. If I could apply 80 of my strength somewhere where you only have 40, well, now I'm twice as strong as you, right?
Okay.
And so that's the concept of jiu-jitsu. In more practical steps, the jiu-jitsu involves moving a conflict to the ground. And the reason you move it to the ground is because it's much more even and predictable on the ground. And then you get past people's legs. And if you can think about it conceptually, if you can get past somebody's legs, let's say I get past your legs, you were 200 strength because you had your whole body, but now I can apply 100% of my body somewhere where you have less than 50% of your strength. So then suddenly the situation is reversed, right? And it's I would say it's a lot of Wall Street people do it. If you go to Henzo's on 30th Street, it's probably a third of the room is Wall Street, and it's it's physical chess in some ways. It's a fascinating sport. I'm fairly obsessed with it. I only wish I was good at it.
Okay, and how does that apply to trading? What do you see in trading? Like, how would you describe how that give us an example of something in terms of trading that kind of could be related to?
There's a new book out by Hannah Gracie, and he has it's about 32 principles, and any one of those two I could pull out and use an example, but I'll just do one. The most important thing about jiu-jitsu is that every time you go to class, you have to eat a defeat, and in trading, if you're right 51% of the time, it might be enough. If you're right 60% of the time, you're doing wonderfully, right? But it means you need to absorb a lot of defeats, right? And jiu-jitsu is like that. You're gonna lose, and you're gonna lose continuously, and it has to be a learning experience to you. And I think there's probably the analogy is obvious there on trading as well.
Completely. I like that. Eat a defeat. I'm going to keep that in the back of my mind when I'm trying to stomach my next loss.
That's right. Yeah.
So you've seen a lot of traders, and over the years, can you tell me a trader, and don't use George because that's, he's too easy. Everyone loves him and stuff. Let's pick somebody else. Give us a trader that that you really admire and kind of changed the way you thought about markets, or opened your eyes to a certain element, or an investor, one of the two.
So when I was at Soros, I traded for 5 CIOs, not including George, and 56 portfolio managers just in the equity side, not including when a macro guy or a convert decided they wanted to trade equities. But I think the people that changed my view the most were actually not at Soros, but at my next job, which was Marlowe Partners. And so that's a couple of guys, and it's a good segue into the next part of my career. So David Steinberg was an analyst at Soros, and he had a very good friend of his, Eric Udoff, who came from Appaloosa, and actually also Zabi Vasquez, who was a Soros guy as well. And so the four of us founded Marlowe Partners, and the key to it was that we were a concentrated value equity and credit investor, and really concentrated. So our top 5 positions sometimes would be 80% of AUM. So our portfolio looked nothing like the S&P, or the MSCI world. And one of the things that was eye-opening for me was, I was a trader and I lived in minutes or seconds, and they lived in a different time space than me, or just about anybody, and they were ultra long-term investors, and they didn't really have a view on a quarter earnings, and certainly had no view on an intraday move. And have you ever seen the most important chart in the world? You should go. I'll forward it to you or Google it to you. Marion Tupy writes about this as well. I believe it's a Steven Pinker chart, but it's global GDP.
Okay, yeah.
Over time,
right.
And it's completely flat, and then it sort of starts to invert, and then it goes parabolic. Certainly after 2000, but after about the 1980s, and certainly in the 20th century, and so to some extent, if the world is getting better faster than you can even comprehend, it doesn't matter too much what you're invested in, because everything's going to improve. Now, as traders, we're catastrophists, right? We all the time, and every day, but when you pull back and you see how the world's improving, if you choose the right asset class, that tide's going to lift all ships. Now, that's not a case for individual investing, without the right training, and background, like David and Eric had, because I'm sure you're familiar with similar statistics. I think it's 58% of S&P stocks over time, deliver almost no return to the holders, right? But they changed the way I looked at investing, and it was I was there 10 years, and what a
so they elongated your time horizon. One of the things that I'm surprised about, like, I can understand not worrying about the intraday squiggles or what it's going to be next week, but even next quarter, like, they were really taking a longer term view. They were saying, I'm not sure if this stock is if the market's going to recognize it this quarter, next quarter, but 2 years from now, the market will recognize that this will be better.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, of course, if you are going to trade a quarter, you could be right and still be wrong on the stock, right?
Yeah.
It depends how other people were positioning, and that's ultimately an unknowable. You can guess at it. You can call your prime broker and see how the short interest has changed, and you can call around or used to be able to call around the trading desk to see how people were positioned in the quarter. But I'll run through one of their favorite investments. It's a company over in the UK, and they're a veterinary company, CVS, and they're exposed to animal health. And if you haven't looked at the animal health space, I mean, it's remarkable. It's the humanization of pets.
Right.
It's the demographics of the Western societies getting older and being replaced by dogs. And just take a personal example. I complain when I take my kids to the dentist, but I don't blink an eye when I go to the vet. I just pay it. I mean, you can lock your dog and your wife in the trunk of a car for an hour, and then open it up to see who's happy to see you.
Derek,
right?
that's like Gordon Gekko. That's like Gordon Gekko says.
One's going to lick your face.
You got to remember that about Waff's kid. They love animals. They can't stand people.
That's right. So so most of Marlowe's investments were just that. Individual. The fulcrum security was how they decide to express a multi-year view on a space or a business. But it was a wonderful place to work. I'm still an investor there, and a shout out to David Steinberg, who recently donated to the Intrepid. I'd get embarrassed if I told you how much, but it was a lot.
Okay, so before we get to that, why don't you just talk to us briefly about your next stop? You're the COO at 33 Capital Management. What do you do there, and what's that kind of new role been like for you?
I mean, it's been amazing. I mean, I feel like I've been lucky for my midlife crises. I could have got a Ferrari or a motorcycle and drove off to Mexico, but instead I got into Jiu Jitsu and I left trading to become a chief operating officer. I actually happened to I'm going to see him tomorrow, actually, for the first time in person. But the person who really who made that first move was a guy named Gizmondi, who's the COO of Discovery. He was a trader at TPG and became COO of Discovery. And trading's a young man's game to some extent. I wouldn't want to go back on the job market now. Essentially, a head trader would have to retire or die, and then there would be 300 other people just like me trying to get that job.
Right
now, as you mature a little bit, I'm not saying I've matured a lot, but I've matured a little bit. A chief operating role is an ideal area to move into. It's relationship management, it's managing people, it's being part of every part of the business, from IR to human resources to trading, and so it's been super interesting. And I don't want to speak too much about 33 because I'm also chief compliance officer.
Yeah, that's right.
But it's I work with a guy named Eddie Zwader, who was COO of Soros from 2001 to 2014, and then successfully ran his own family office. And so I'm getting a PhD in how to be a COO.
That's terrific.
And I'm making some mistakes, but I'm utilizing those jiu-jitsu skills and trying to get past them and move on.
Well, that's great. Now let's talk about why we're really here, which is to help the troops. How did you get involved in this? What possesses a Kiwi to want to help the American troops?
It's actually a bit of an embarrassing story. I don't know how many people I've told this, but I was virulently anti-Iraq war back in 2002, 2003. Embarrassingly so. I feel like I owe a lot of the people who I, in some cases, literally tried to fight over this. But I think I skipped work to go protest on the streets. It was really, and I believed every conspiracy theory about us stealing the oil and Cheney, Halliburton taking things over. And when we eventually invaded the country anyway, a lot of that, two things occurred to me. Number one, I still thought it was a mistake, just for different reasons. I'm not saying I was right about the original opposition to the war, but it wasn't the military's fault that they were over there. And so a lot of that excess energy you have when you're a young guy, 28 or however old I was at that stage, really needed to go somewhere, and fortunately went the right place. It went to support our military families, and the first person I raised money for was a guy named John Folsom, and I'll never forget this. I used to listen to and watch CNN back then. I certainly don't anymore, but they did a profile of this guy, and he was a Nebraska colonel. I think he lied to get into the military so he could go fight in Vietnam, and he'd been pulled out of the reserves to run a forward operating base in Anbar province, which is not a very nice part of Iraq, and one of his troops was terribly injured, and they were passing their helmet round to give money to the family. And I just thought, what kind of world are we in that they're over, this guy from Nebraska is pulled back in to serve the country, and they're passing and their wages around to support their family. I mean, that struck me as, unbelievably unfair. It still makes me kind of like pissed off, to be honest. And it was a long time ago. It was 20 years ago.
Right.
In any case, not to talk, but that is Wounded Warriors Family Support, which is a wonderful organization. I still think about them often, and we've done a fair amount of fundraising for them. and the anyway, I bartended, and I think I raised $200, and I sent that money to John Folsom, and we started a conversation, and we did bigger and bigger events until we eventually did an event on the Intrepid back in probably 2009.
Wow.
And
And
actually,
you've
a
been
funny
doing it every year since then?
not every year.
Okay.
Most years we
Okay.
would do it. We've done probably 11 events. You know, we didn't do one after COVID for
Right.
obvious reasons. Every year I promise myself I will never do another event. You know, I'm in a better mood because today, but you know, I was up at 2 o'clock in the morning saying, this is a huge mistake. You know, we're not going to raise enough money to make it profitable. Not enough people are going to turn up. And then I go to work and I make a list of people and I call them up and say, look, I need your support. You know, the military, you know, family's situation may have fallen away from the news, but it doesn't mean that it's still not important. And, you know, the response I get from people is extraordinary. My friend Brendan Caputo bought 15 tickets today. I called him up. He bought the tickets.
Okay.
You know, as I already said, David Steinberg made an enormous donation today. You know, it humbles me that you know, I'm not a salesman. It's very difficult for me to ask for money. I really don't like it. But the response is always remarkable from everyone. So I'm always enormously appreciative.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that night. Where is it? So it's in New York City, obviously in the harbor, and it's on the ship. And
Yeah,
where can they buy the tickets, and who's going to be there? And like, tell us a little bit about like that evening, how it's going to go down.
So one of the things that I think is unique about the event is you know, I've been to Robin Hood's and you name it. I've been to them all. I've had seats in the front, and no one really seems to enjoy that event except for the beginning and the end, and that's because that's when the bars open and they're being left alone.
Okay.
And we've experimented with entertainment and speeches at the Intrepid. We've had presidential candidates speak. We've had Third Eye Blind play. You know, shout out to my friend Omer for organizing that. We had Neo play. We've had big events at the Intrepid, but you don't need to do any of that kind of stuff. You know, but Budweiser sponsors us. You know, my friend PJ Anderson, City Derivatives, you know, is sponsoring us on gin and vodka. And, you know, the Intrepid Museum is such an iconic area. All you need is a DJ and 1,000 people, right? And everybody's catching up with people they haven't seen for years, or they didn't know that they know. And the speeches just get in the way. I mean, I tried to give a speech a few years ago, and people started throwing beer cans at me. You know, it's pointless, you know. So, you know, we'll often do the national anthem. This year, honestly, we're just going to play music and let people do what they want.
Okay, so where do they go to buy tickets?
You know, I've thought about how to answer that question, and I think the way to answer it is, I'm sorry, I don't know if you can hear that, but my meetings calendars are popping up. It doesn't mean I need to go. The way to buy tickets is to look me up on LinkedIn or look me up on Bloomberg. You know, my last name's Wallis, Wallis. But just reach out. You know, become part of our network. I'll send you a link. You know, I will create a discount code for listeners of Market Huddle to give you 25% off your ticket. You know, it's $150 with a discount for a 4-hour open bar at the Intrepid Museum in the middle of September. You know, people are going to be coming back from the Hamptons and wondering what to do. The city will be firing. You know, it's going to be one of the biggest events of the year, and I'm going to turn up in shorts and a t-shirt. You know,
okay. So you want them to go? You want them to link to you LinkedIn or to DM you on Bloomberg, and
that's right.
And you'll sell them the ticket. And how about, you know, obviously if people just feel like they want to donate to a cause and they can't be there, same deal.
Yeah, and look, if you don't want to reach out to me directly, you know, understand I've probably made a lot of enemies in my time anyway. You know, the name of the charity is One More Wave. It's onemorewave.com. They make it's founded by Navy SEALs. My friend Luke Bartnick is on the board. Luke Bartnick used to work at at Soros, and they make sporting equipment for disabled military veterans, and particularly in the surfing arena, to have a Navy SEAL take you out surfing, if you've been injured in the past and you need to get your head right, I think it's a phenomenal organization. I really believe in it. So onemorewave.com, your donations will be hugely welcomed. They'll do a lot with it. They're great guys. If you want to come to the event, you can go to their website and then scroll down to find the Intrepid event. Or again, just I want to hear from you. Reach out to me. I'll send you a link to buy tickets. And then the one last thing, a shout out to our sponsors, Freedom Capital, Clear Street, Bloomberg. My firm's a sponsor. You can reach out to them and tell them that that they're sponsoring the event, and if you're a Bloomberg user, and ask for tickets. All
right.
All of those things would be great.
I actually got the page in front of me. It's onemorewave.com/pages/Intrepid. And you can go there, or you can reach out to Derek directly in LinkedIn or Bloomberg if you've got one. Derek?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. It's a great cause. I hope this helps. I'd love to see. I wish I could be there with you. I hope.
Open invite, and I'll send you a couple of tickets for next year's, because even though I swear to myself that I'm not going to do it again, we all know I'm going to do it again.
I won't go make this one, but I will definitely think hard about the next one. So listen, thank you so much for your time, and thanks for everything, Derek. You've been a real gentleman, and it's been a blast catching up with you.
I'm going to go right onto your website and make sure that I'm paying you that monthly fee for that email, Kevin.
Thanks again, Derek. Take care.
All right. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.